evening and welcome to our program. I'm your host, Nicole Hayles. This evening, we will break down the final national debate and continue to look at candidates who are contesting seats in the upcoming general election. Joining me in the discussion are political analyst and acting director of institutional research at Northern Caribbean University, Paul Bourne, and political commentator Linton Gordon. We'll also be joined by People's National Party candidate for Northwestern St. James, George Hamilton. Good evening, gentlemen, and thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
The final debate saw the leader of the Jamaica Labour Party and Prime Minister Andrew Holness going up against leader of the opposition and president of the People's National Party, Dr. Peter Phillips. The debate started on the topic of states of emergencies, SOEs. What are your views on the SOE and its effectiveness? Did the Prime Minister answer the question? Paul, let's start with you.
I think the Prime Minister did an excellent job in terms of answering the question. He actually stayed on point. And he also pointed out that there are some other issues that they are considering. And I also think that was very good of him to introduce the fact that there was need for community policing, technology inside of crime fighting. So I think he did a very good job in answering that question.
Linton?
I think the issue of states of emergency needs to be looked at a higher level than soldiers being present in a community and crime declines in the community. The state of emergency is a very, very special power that should be used in exceptional circumstances. And it's an extremely dangerous practice to cultivate the use of state of emergency and feed it to the citizens so that they now see that as a salvation. Once that is established, what do you do next if it is not solving the problem at the national level? And it is not. Because what is happening, you declare a state of emergency in an area and you might see a reduction of crime in that specific area. But nationally, crime is not declining, and therefore one needs to look carefully at the use of the state of emergency. There are two things you need to bear in mind quickly. Rights are denied and abrogated. Two, abnormality is brought to bear in a community, affecting people's movement and activities and the businesses that can overlay. We have to be careful that people don't become fed with this practice and it becomes our norm, as has happened in so many countries in South America.
Paul, Dr. Phillips's consistency in decision-making was brought up on the topic of security. In your opinion, did Dr. Phillips's vote for and against the use of the SOEs, is it indicative of the type of leadership that he has?
Not really, but if you go back to history, you'll realize that operating through the police force, the People's National Party has sort of moved away from state of emergency to various squads, which would be similar in terms of operating, in terms of its operations. So all it is that Dr. Phillips was doing is sticking to tradition in terms of how they use the police force, not even to use the police force, but how they use special paramilitary units within the police force to deal with crime. So he's just playing true to form, and there's nothing special with that.
Linton, your assessment?
I don't think Dr. Phillips brought anything new to the table. He spoke of reform, equipping the police more. I think we need to go a bit deeper than these band-aids that we are placing on the issue. The fact is, we have to also be careful of militarizing the police force. It ought not to be made a paramilitary organization. It should be one that can operate in the community with minimum use of force and somehow get citizens to depend, rely on, and respect them, and to report incidents of crime to them. There are bigger issues such as squatting, deprive and depressed communities, in which it's all but impossible to enforce law and order in Jamaica.
Paul, on the topic of education, Prime Minister Holness said every child entering primary school should enter at the same level. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, that is a fictitious dream because people are born with different gifts, different abilities. So for you to say, and I'm an educator, so for you to say that all child should come in at a certain level, at the same level, is really fictitious because it is not going to be irrespective of what people are taught. People have special gifts, special abilities, and education is one such special ability that some students will have. So nevertheless, I understand what the Prime Minister is trying to say. Okay, then we need to get some standardization in terms of the quality of persons going into the secondary schools. And that is true. But it's a myth to think that it will happen.
Linton?
We have to start at the primary level. And as a Myconian, I firmly believe that the primary schools are where you should lay the foundation for children to develop educationally. If they leave the primary schools at a very low level, what is going to happen? They become liability when they enter the secondary and the high school level. So we need a number of things at the primary level. We need more classrooms, more teachers, better trained teachers, and the teacher-pupil ratio should nowhere in a primary school be over 15. Once we get that, we are heading in the direction that so many countries in Europe, in Asia, that started way after us and are now way ahead of us because of that investment in primary education.
Linton, still with you on the matter of fixed election dates. What are your thoughts on this?
A fixed election date can serve a purpose and so too a flexible election date. The problem with fixed election dates is that campaigns tend to start over a very long period because persons will start even a year or 2 years before and spend excessive amount of time given the projection that they know when the election is coming. Where it's the discretion of the Prime Minister, as in this case, the period of serious campaigning started in July when there was the announcement, and within 6 to 8 weeks we will have gotten over the election. That's an advantage, but it's a matter for the population. I have no hard and fast opinion on it one way or the other.
Paul, your thoughts?
There's a mystery to election being actually at the discretion of the Prime Minister in terms of people are looking forward to what is going to happen, what is the Prime Minister going to do, and that is a part of the politics and the essence of politics. If that was supposed to be taken away from the Prime Minister to a fixed election date, a number of things are going to change. And Linton actually alluded to a number of those issues. But for me, I prefer the Prime Minister have some say in determining that election time period and the citizens moving along with all the political fare and flavor in terms of that versus a fixed date that persons, as Linton mentioned, would begin campaigning from the very day it unfolds.
Earlier today, we asked the public their views on the debate between the Prime Minister and the opposition leader. Let's hear what they had to say.
Honestly speaking, I listened to it, and based on the question posed to both parties, some of them were answers, some of them wasn't. But to say who won it, I would give 50-50. But the other two debates, I think the PMP has won the other two big debates. But for Saturday night, I wouldn't say, because based on the question that was posed, some of the question, both parties answered well. Some of them wasn't answered.
In all honesty, I seriously think Andrew Holiness did his best. He came out strong. I like the points that he made, especially in regards to women in the Senate and the House. I think Peter Phillips has the years of experience in terms of knowing how to come out strong, how to say what he thinks the public needs to hear. But Andrew Holness did a good job.
And I believe Peter Phillips come out sound like somebody who know what he's about, and then put across him thing in a good way.
Mr. Holness have point. I understand it clearly, and I get what he was saying about what he has achieved for the 4.5 years that he is in office. So I say Mr. Holness have won the debate.
Well, I believe that Peter Phillips won the debate. I know that Prime Minister Andrew Holness, I know that he is good at words, he's sharp and concise, but with the purity of Peter Phillips' heart and with the decisions that he will be making, and based on what was said, I do believe that Peter Phillips won the debate, and that's my opinion.
There were mixed views on what the public thought of Dr. Phillips' response to female representation in politics. What are your views on his response? Paul, let's start with you.
This is a very good one, and I really like it. What I did the debate in terms of the number of questions, in addition to the opening remarks as well as the closing remarks. And for me, Mr. Holness was on point, on cue, did, as one of the persons said, he brought his point across in a succinct and simple manner. And that for me was very important. Dr. Phillips, on the other hand, was somewhat planned, archaic in terms of how he responded to some of the things. And I think a number of the questions he did poorly didn't answer them at all. However, what I observed carefully with Dr. Phillips is that he was an excellent rebutter. And in a number of cases when the questions were asked, he did not answer them. And that for me was a low point.
Linton?
I really do not share the view just expressed by Paul. I think that both persons address a number of issues in a fairly excellent way, and I think both of them fail in a significant way. I mentioned education earlier. I think both of them fail to address education in a wholesome way, in a way that the parent of a child going to primary school can say, this party is offering this for my child. And it's clear and it's unambiguous and certain. The Prime Minister, I think, ran into difficulty with the 20 odd houses that have been provided, it is said, because they were reduced to starters. And that is very unfortunate. I don't blame him. I think the persons who prepared him misled him into saying these houses were in fact complete. The remarks about women in the Senate, Dr. Phillips failed to address the points I believe he's getting at. He should have addressed those as options as against restraint to women. In other words, a mother might say, rather than getting involved in politics, I am going to stay home and see to my children. That's an option. But to go further to say that it is something ingrained in politics is, in my view, a failure to be fair to the fairer sex.
Overall, which leader best represented their party? Paul, let's start with you.
Well, which leader best represent the party? Clearly, the Prime Minister, to me, represented extremely well. And credit to Dr. Phillips, because despite the fact that he said that his health is okay and all of that, I thought that he did not answer a number of issues. And what he should have done was to have put forward clearly his arguments and his case versus approaching it as really a rebuttal. In many times he was asked questions. He used a rebuttal style in terms of this. And remember carefully, it's a debate. You're putting forward your arguments and not so much saying what the other person has done, except if it's a rebuttal. And for me, he did not represent as well as I thought he would have or should have.
Linton, your views?
My view is that perhaps the most important failure of both gentlemen is to address foreign policy. We have at our doorstep the difficulties and problems touching and concerning Venezuela. I don't see how an aspiring prime minister could debate issues without touching that. We have the pressure being placed on Jamaica by our powerful neighbor to the north to go wholesome in certain relationships with Israel. We need to hear what are the policy guidelines that will direct Jamaica's foreign policy in dealing with these two situations. Secondly, apart from outlining improvements to police force and police station and all of that, nobody addressed the fundamental issue of a security policy. I don't want to call it a crime plan, but something that outlines a projection that this will be done, and the anticipation is that crime will be reduced, and a schedule is set over a 5-year, 6-year, or whatever period. We need to hear that. We need to have a measure and run, so we can say to someone, look, in August 2020, you promised that now it's 22, we would be at such a point. You have failed. But this reduce crime, reduce crime. There's nothing to hold anybody to account for that. So I think both persons fail in these areas, and it's not too late for them or their spokespersons to come forward and produce some outlines that we can go by, both in international relations and in internal matters on security and education.
As it pertains to the issue of the new protocols put in place to allow persons in isolation to come out and vote come September 3rd, what are your thoughts on this? Paul, let's start with you.
Well, I love the fact that we are giving persons, allowing persons to actually execute their rights. It's a constitutional right that they have, and therefore that should not be infringed. However, what I would love to have happen, instead of what I see forwarded in terms of the protocol, is for there to be some special arrangement for these individuals to vote, whether it's going to be on telephone or particular place, versus actually allowing them to actually come on the streets, go to the polling station, even when they're actually carriers of the virus. And that is where I'm actually concerned. Now, if these individuals are not carriers of the virus, but are quarantined for whatever reason, I am saying special arrangements should be made for these individuals and not have them exposed to the general public what the protocol is actually doing, and as I see it.
Paul, your assessment of allowing persons in isolation to vote come September 3rd?
I think you mean me. You said Paul.
Linton.
Yes. No, the government should be commended for making efforts to accommodate persons who have medical challenges. And if what is proposed, including the involvement of the police, one person in a vehicle, the windows are down to avoid air conditioning and all that, and that arriving at the polling station, there are scant, if no, perhaps nobody there because of the specific time set aside. If all that is done, it can be effective, and I'm most pleased to see efforts being made to give all persons the constitutional right to vote, irrespective of the medical challenge they are facing.
All right, thanks, Linton. Let's shift gear now and speak with Mr. George Hamilton and his plans for his constituency. Mr. Hamilton, you're going up against the current Member of Parliament for St. James Northwestern, the Jamaica Labour Party's Horace Chang. What makes you confident that you will win this election come September 3?
Well, I am actually a son of the soil. I was born in the community of Glendavan, and I know the constituency very well. And the constituency has been suffering with a lot of essential services, like proper water supply, road condition. We need road improvements, and recreational area for our children and our elderly people. There is also a major problem in our constituency that affects people, unemployment. Our constituency is plagued with unemployment and crime, and I think our present member of parliament needs to do much more to rid the community of crime. As it relates to proper water supply, I think that at this time we shouldn't be having this problem. Our community plagued with this is an essential service that needs to be fixed immediately, and this is one of the services that I would like to fix. When I take office after September 3rd.
Share with us what are some of your plans for the constituency if you should win this general election.
All right, some of my plans are creating a recreational facility because presently there is no recreational facility in our community. Our community need a community center. I actually had plans to set up a shopping center that would create employment and programs in our community center that will help build family, because one of the major problems that we have with our children, there is no real family bonding. So there are programs that will be set up to build relationship that we can have better family. So as a result, we'll fix crime problem.
Mr. Hamilton, tell us, how has COVID-19 affected your campaign efforts?
Well, as it relates to COVID-19, recently we got scared in one of our community where we had an outbreak. So we have actually put in place all the necessary precaution even before we have this new protocol.
Okay, so what plans do you have in place in light of the new protocols put in place by Prime Minister Andrew Holness last night, allowing persons in quarantine to come out and vote? And are your campaign teams and election day workers prepared to deal with the changes?
Yes, as I explained, that we are already ahead because of a recent outbreak in one of our communities. So we already actually has measures in place where we have issued sanitizers to our citizens. We encourage our workers to wear masks. We even travel with additional masks that we can actually distribute to community that is in need.
Okay, so Mr. Hamilton, come September 3, why should people vote for you as a member of parliament for St. James Northwestern?
Well, I think that our current member of parliament has been in office over 18 years, and I'm still having this problem where our community is lack of major water supply, and I think water is an essential service that is needed in our community, and I don't see the reason why this is still happening at this stage.
Paul and Linton, before we go, your final thoughts on persons being allowed to vote, persons in isolation and quarantine being allowed to exercise their franchise come September 3. Your assessment on this protocol?
Well, the issue of allowing person to vote is extremely important. And if it is cancelled, that actually speaks to removing not only democracy, but people's right. And this is a critical part of democracy. So whereas I understand what the government is actually putting forward in terms of putting in protocols to ensure that they activate their franchise, I am saying I would have loved for it to have gone a stage further, in the sense that you have them vote in isolation or have them vote outside of the normal environment with other individuals. That is all I'm saying that I would have wanted to happen, in addition to them being allowed to vote.
Linton, your final arguments?
Yes, I share Paul's concern, but I must caution him that a polling station has certain characteristics and must be established as a condition precedent to voting commence. And it will be difficult to replicate this all over the country wherever persons are who are infected. And that is why I said I believe the arrangements that have been put in place are the best in the circumstances. My projection is that despite all of this, it's going to be a low turnout. I am looking at about 37.3% of the electorate voting, which would be about 10% below the 48 it was the last occasion. And I think that part of the cause of this significantly will not only be the turnout of persons from both parties, but the threat of being infected, whether it is possible or not possible. Persons might have their perception and just say, I'm not going there, I'm not taking the risk. And that is going to affect the turnout. And it's going to be unfortunate, but we are heading to lower and lower percentage of persons voting, which is not good for democracy.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you to our guests this evening for joining us. With us this evening, we had political analyst and acting director of institutional research at Northern Caribbean University, Paul Bourne, political commentator Linton Gordon, and PNP candidate for Northwestern St. James, George Hamilton. I'm Nicole Hayles. Thanks for watching.